All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me today. Credit to where credit is due. Before I start, I want to thank Rod Soto and the organizers of Hack Miami for being able to put together this event and having us here, and to the community of Hack Miami. So who am I? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Santiago Gama. My nickname is Santi. I work at Dragos, which is an ICS cybersecurity firm, and my role is in the OT Watch team as a threat hunter. Our responsibilities in OT Watch are to provide managed threat hunting services to our customers. We currently operate at around 84 production environments across 10 different industrial verticals. Some like our most significant verticals that we work at are oil and gas, electric generation, manufacturing, food and beverage, mining, and water treatment. Now, why did I want to bring out this presentation though? So overall, when I first started in ICS cybersecurity, I had a lot of questions though. I've stumbled, and essentially I want to make sure that future cybersecurity professionals that decide to join this space don't stumble as much as I do. I want to try to pave the road a little bit into it. So what we're going to cover today is what's an ICS OT environment. We're going to go through some of the components that we can find in it, and examples. After that, we're going to go into OT architecture. And finally is how do we approach cybersecurity in industrial control systems. So let's give it a roll. So the first question that I had is, what the hell is an ICS OT environment? So essentially, I wanted to understand two things. ICS are industrial control systems, and OT stands for operational technology. So an OT environment essentially is the infrastructure built around physical processes that allow us to control and monitor this process though. And if you want to summarize it into a one statement, you can think about it IT with physics. So yes, there is IT related in OT environments. It's not completely industrial, and this is where we're going to come in a bit. But there's also IT in it. Now, what are some of the what are 6 common components that we find in ICS environments? So the first one that we find is process instrumentation devices. These are the actual physical devices that are connected to the process that we're monitoring and want to control. So you can think about valves, you can think about pumps, sensors, temperature measurements. In this example, it's a little bit too small, but these are essentially a couple valves. So essentially, it's what's connected to the physical process. After that, we have the controllers though. So the controllers, you can think about this as ruggedized computers that they're connected to the physical devices, and these ones allow us to modify the state of the instrumentation devices. Then we have remote terminal units. So remote terminal units are similar to controllers, but the difference relies in their design to withstand harsher environments, and they're usually deployed into very inaccessible locations, and they still provide data that we're able to observe regarding the process. After that, we need a way to visualize and understand what's happening though. This is where the human-machine interfaces come by, and essentially these devices, they allow us to visualize the data from the controllers, and these are what allow us to have a visual aspect of the process itself. And they can come in different flavors, so they can be operation panels, as what you kind of see here, or they can actually be deployed as applications, and then we can access them from like endpoint devices. And finally, I want to talk about another couple assets though. So a safety instrumented system is a system designed to make the process return to a normal state in case unsafe conditions are met. So this doesn't mean like it's a sudden halt. Like the function of this device is, all right, we have X and Y conditions that make the process be unsafe. We're gonna make adjustments into the logic of the controllers and override them, or they're controllers that have a different logic program, and they bring the process back to a normal state. And finally, historian servers. Historian servers are essentially servers that hold data and historical data from the process, but essentially, like, what I mean by historical is my long years worth of data, though. And engineers in operation plants, they leverage these servers to be able to analyze the process and look for ways to make it more efficient, but also to make predictions about how to improve it. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Purdue model. So we talk about what we have in an OT environment. How does this look distributed on the network? How do we place it on the network? So we're going to go from the bottom up. The first level is the physical process itself. So like we mentioned, this is where we have our sensors, our valves, our pumps, actuators, and the discrete devices as well. On level 1, this is where we have the controllers. So this is where we have our PLCs and RTUs and our safety instrumented system. When we move up again on level 2, this is where we have our supervisory control layer. So this is where we can find our HMI servers, our operation panels, operator workstations, which is essentially Windows machines that have uploaded HMI applications that allow us to visualize what's happening. And then when we move to level 3, this is where we have devices that affect the workflow and the integrity of the process, but also this is where we can find certain devices that allow us to administer and manage the OT environment. So in this area, though, we might have our OT Active Directory domain controller in order to be able to manage the rest of the devices that we find in an OT environment. And finally, level 3.5. So essentially, we want OT environment hosts critical assets, pretty much. Level 3.5 is the DMZ, which is the layer that is designed and contains the devices that allow us to safely access the OT environment. And it's supposed to be a segregation from external networks. So this is a very critical part of the whole architecture, because this is essentially the gates to the kingdom. You know, you don't just want to hand the castle. You just don't want to handle the castle to the attackers. Now, we're going to set some expectations versus reality. So after I first learned about the Purdue model, in my mind, the first thing that came to my mind was a vault. So on the inside, you have an OT environment. All the components, all the devices, all the process. You want to keep it air-gapped, obviously. That's the objective. Come on, people. We're professionals. We know there's not such thing as air-gapped environments. What's the sad reality, though? Yes, it looks a little bit more like a sword box, in my opinion. So if we had the door, that would be the DMC. But due to the nature of the technologies that we deal with and the nature of the environments, we cannot have it as secure as the vault as we want to. So what are some examples of things that break that security and that segmentation, though? So the first one is vendors that need direct access due to their proprietary technology. This is something you'll see. There's certain vendors that provide certain monitoring equipment, and when it's deployed in the OT environment, vendors essentially need direct access, and they're like, all right, we'll handle the data process. It goes back to them. So that's a gap in the DMZ. Another thing that it's sometimes recognized, and we're going to talk a little bit more further in the presentation, is misconfigured assets that are able to communicate to external networks. So OT devices, like I said, are not supposed to be reaching out to the internet, ideally. Unfortunately, sometimes when the design of the process was implemented, people make mistakes. So they might be exposed, and this is where trouble can also happen. Another thing that I think is a detrimental is to access the OT environment without proper jump, without proper obstacles. So, for example, a jump box. Like we observed before, the DMC is critical in order to keep the system as air gapped as possible. But sometimes there's more than one way to get in. Another thing is, and if my pen testers here, I feel like this is one that they might be able to leverage though, is if you use a domain controller sitting in the IT side of the house to administer your OT environments. Why is this a problem? Well, as adversaries evolve, one of the ways, if the OT environment is not the first spot they can target, they go into IT. They pop IT, and then they try to pivot into the OT environment, which is something that's a very common attack vector. If you have the key to the castle in the IT environment that they popped, well, might as well. Why do we have the DMC for? So, and finally, another thing that I've noticed though is a lack of secure access to historians. So historians, sometimes they're accessed by business side of the house, when they're sitting where they're sitting, malicious actors can also use this entry point as a pivot to the OT network. So now I want to show you guys a simple example. This is what in my eyes, is like a hello world of what a simple OT environment looks like. So essentially, we have a water source, we have a valve, a flow switch, a pump, and we want to fill a water tank. On the water tank, we have level switches and level transmitters. Our objective, though, is to have the water tank be filled at around 50 to 80% of its capacity, right? So how does it look like? On our HMI, like we have a PLC that these devices are connected to, and the PLC is connected to the HMI. So from the HMI, we're able to see the state of the instrumentation device. So in this case, if the valve is open and we recognize a flow of water, we can operate the pump, and the level transmitter, this number will increase, and it will actually be telling us how much of the tank have we filled. Simple example. Now, another thing is, because our objective is to maintain the integrity of the process and safety, not only of our operators, but also the safety of the equipment. If you don't have running water with a pump, well, that's going to be a bad day for everyone. So on our logic, or the PLC, we set the conditions that if the valve is not open and we don't recognize the flow switch, the pump should be off. And in this case, or if the level desired where we want the water to be at is higher than the one we marked on the original logic, so let's say that we establish the tank to be filled at 80%, in this case it's a 95%, shut down everything and don't allow for water flow. Very easy. And also, HMI allows us to see if there's problems with the process. So let's imagine a situation where we see the valve that is open, but we don't see water flowing from the switch. This could be a potential issue with the valve, and maybe there's no water going, and it could damage the pump. So having this type of logic in place is what allows operators to handle the process. And this is essentially a very simple example of what it looks like, but this is the idea. And I think it's simple enough for us to visualize it and understand how each piece fits in its place. Now, what are the differences between OT security and IT security? If we think about IT security, what's the first thing that comes into our mind? Information, data. So the focus on IT is how we handle the data, how we manage a business. And IT essentially is we want to protect the data and the system that has the data on it. And OT, the focus is why we are the business. Essentially, we build the whole infrastructure based on the process that we need to manipulate. We need to control. In OT security, though, we need to focus on how the system of the system works. We have a valve that's connected to a PLC, that's connected to an HMI, how the system of the system works. And finally, there's different consequences, though. In IT environments, we might have loss of trust by our customers, we might have sensitive data exposed, private personal the PII information, loss of revenue, there can be fines, there can be business disruption as well while we handle the incident. In OT, consequences are a little bit more dire, unfortunately. We can have safety issues and life-threatening situations. We can have large power grid blackouts. We can have serious environmental damages. In order to ensure that the process is safe again, that could take weeks, maybe months, so it's a slow restoration process. Asset owners can face massive business losses because essentially the process is what it's all about. If the process is disrupted, it's massive business losses. And we also handle the IT consequences as well in the mix. So how do we approach it? What do we need to do in order to approach cybersecurity industrial control systems or OT environments? The first thing, and I think this is a statement that has resonated with me along my career, is reliability is security. If the system is not reliable, it cannot be secure. What happens if something that we're looking at is faulty and it's telling us the wrong thing? It's not secure at all. How can we determine it's actually true? So reliability is very important in order to keep the system secure. So recently, SANS released a white paper that's called the 5 Critical Controls of ICS Security. It was written by Rob M. Lee and Tim Conway. When I read this white paper, it was very enlightening, and I think it was very informative and very understanding for people that are beginning in order to understand how to take another approach in IT security. The first one is to have a ICS-specific incident response plan. So I think in a previous talk mentioned today is there's a lack of communication between IT and OT. It happens. Operators, they want the process flowing. IT, they want security. There needs to be compromise. And this is where an ICS-focused incident response plan come in. If there's an incident, there needs to be coordination between OT and IT, but also there needs to be cybersecurity specialists that handle the OT incident. And in an incident in an OT environment, the priority is you got to keep the process running while we handle the incident. But we want to make sure that there's no disruption. So it's a little bit of a different approach. The second aspect that we have is defensible architecture. Now, essentially is with defensible architecture, what we want is something that will enable our defenders to defend the network, something that will make harder for the malicious actors to get into the network, straight up and forward. But it also is to enable defenders to get the proper tools they need whenever a bad day is going to come. The third aspect is network monitoring and visibility. In an OT environment, the more you can see, the better prepared you're able to determine a root cause scenario of what could have happened. B, you have a better understanding of where did something go wrong. So inside an OT environment, sometimes encryption is not the key because we lack visibility. The risk and the cost benefit is a little bit different. So we actually want to know what the hell is going on our network inside OT environment because it'll allow us to find out way quicker where things went wrong. The fourth aspect is secure remote access. So like I said before, we don't want our OT assets being easily accessible. Simple enough like that. Finally, risk-based vulnerability management. In OT environments, we not only deal with different components, we deal with legacy systems. Like I said, if the system is not reliable, it's not secure. OT environments are designed to have between a 10 to 30-year life cycle management. So sometimes what could be the solution could be worse than the remedy could be worse than the sickness. If we apply a patch that breaks the HMI application, that's not reliable anymore. Therefore, the process is not secure. So how can we apply 5 critical controls into a real life scenario? So we're going to revisit what happened in Oldsmar 2021 here in Deer, Florida, a couple years ago. And we're going to do a little bit of a thinking exercise. Let's revisit some of the things. Personally, I don't remember, so I'm going to let you all read them for a couple minutes, and then we're going to start. All right. So the first thing that I want to highlight in this case is what could have been worse? Yeah, we're going to start negatively. What could have been worse? And, this is an older version of the slide, but there wasn't a safety instrumented system in that time. Is if the operator hadn't noticed that if the operator hadn't noticed the modification on the HMI or the server or the computer that he was visualizing, the system would have triggered an alert, but it wouldn't have make an adjustment. According to the news article, the report could have been effective after 24 to 36 hours of the modification to the HMI parameter. If the adversary would have been more sophisticated, they could have transitioned to an engineering workstation and upload malicious logic to controllers directly. So engineering workstations are critical devices in OT environments because this is what engineers do to upload the logic to controllers. So if a malicious actor would have been more technical or more sophisticated or maybe had more persistent, that could have been an objective. Oldsmar is a city of 15,000 inhabitants. Based on what we read in the earlier slide, the objective of the attacker was to modify the sodium hydroxide levels of the water from 100 particles per million, which is what makes it potable, to 1,100 particles per million, which that makes it highly corrosive and toxic. The safety of the inhabitants of Oldsmar could have been compromised if the attack would have been successful. And finally, I'm thinking because of the magnitude of this situation, the plant would have come to a halt, and the attack would have been highly disrupted. Now, this sounds very negative. Hell to the no, I don't like it. Let's think about what could have been better, though. Let's think about our Superman scenario. So, before the attack, let's say that the water plant had run a TTX exercise, a tabletop exercise, with their incident responders, and they would have had a plan in place. The TTX would have helped them discover that the OT asset was externally accessible. This would have triggered the operators and the engineers and the IT department to make adjustments, make the defensible make the architecture more safe. So it would have allowed them to make sure that the OT asset was not accessible from the internet and was sitting behind a DMZ. Also, as it was mentioned before, the operator realized what happened and quickly modified the parameters that were changed, thankfully. But we shouldn't have to rely on an alert or an operator. So in a good operation design, and a good operational technology environment design, the controllers and the HMI would have had safety ranges established in order to avoid human disruption from modifying the values to dangerous values or to create unsafe conditions. If we would have deep packet inspections, log centralization, and baseline detections deployed in the environment, like to this day, we might have been able to get to a root cause of what happened, or we might have more evidence of what happened. And in an OT environment, the reason why we're gonna try to get to a root cause promptly is because if we're able to determine what happened, it's what allows it's what allows us to make sure that the environment is safe again after we restore the process. So after 2 years of not having evidence, that's a little bit challenging. Finally, though, if the asset owners would have implemented multi-factor authentication and role-based access control for users in the jump box that acts as the OT environment, it might have hindered the attacker from being authenticated and having access to TeamViewer. Before I wrap this up, here are some resources that have helped me out throughout my journey in ICS. So highly recommend them, you give them a look. And overall, if you guys, thank you very much for being here. And now, if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Have a note on this Osmar plan. I mean, there was a message from kind of, looks like from FBI, concluded there was nothing on evidence of external access, and it looks like it was the same employee who reported it. So I mean, it's still not clear, but that was a last message in the news was like a few months ago or something like that.
Oh yeah. So, well, I knew this might have been brought up. My perspective with the Osmar exercise before we knew this information, I think it's still a valid exercise though. Insider threats are also a risk in OT environments. So it would have brought that would have also brought like more evidence, you know, like the exercise still valid. So yeah, maybe TeamViewer was not leveraged externally, but having better network monitoring visibility would have helped the investigators get more evidence about what happened. And also in the second article that I had linked on this one of Cyberscoop, what they mention is there wasn't enough evidence that indicates that it was a cyber attack. When the way I read that is just because there's not enough evidence doesn't mean it didn't happen.
But anyway, they still refer to that employee, so probably they have some clue that probably that's the same guy.
Yeah, that's also a possibility. But like I said, it's still a valid scenario, you know. So maybe we want to have to take into account like the first two steps or the first 2 points, but we would still like network monitoring and log evidence collection would have helped them get to a root cause. So.
Yeah. Moreover, I see that you mentioned what they implemented afterwards. So whatever the incident was, it still have a good impact in terms of increasing security.
Mm-hmm. Any more questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being here.